Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Natural Academy podcast. Today we have a fascinating topic, the healing powers of cannabis. So we're going to talk about the history, safety, how to use it most effectively for healing purposes. We'll talk about some of the controversy around it as well. But I'm excited to get into this topic. First off, I just want to plug our blue blocking glasses, NaturoBlocks. You can check these out at naturoacademy.com. This time of year, they're great, especially as things are getting darker. So, it means it's difficult at night to avoid blue light because it's getting dark at like 5 p.m. here. So, it's common to watch TV or go on your screens, whatever. But the nighttime blue blockers in particular are very helpful for this because what they do is they block out the blue light so you can still enjoy your screens, but you don't have to deal with the negative consequences of melatonin suppression. So you can check those out at naturalacademy.com. Go to the nighttime sleep glasses section. We got a lot of different frames to choose from, and you can use code NATUROFAM for a discount. So that's NATUROFAM, and that's at naturalacademy.com. Awesome. So, cannabis. So cannabis, a lot of people don't know this, but this is just the species name. So there's a lot of differences between, so there's different types of cannabis. There's sativa, there's indica, there's another strain called ruderalis. We get confused between like cannabis, weed, hemp, marijuana. Like, what is the difference? So cannabis is just the umbrella term that involves all of the different species of cannabis, and they all have different uses. So, typically, when we're talking about cannabis for medicinal use, we're speaking of the female plant. So, there's a big difference between female and male. Female produces a flower that has certain compounds, including something like THC. So, that's what provides a lot of medicinal value. It's also the psychoactive component that gets you high, whereas the male plant doesn't contain that at all. So, you physically cannot get high off of a male hemp plant. But they all, like I said, they all are under the umbrella of cannabis, so that's why it gets a little bit confusing. But we're going to basically talk about all that, all the different uses, and we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty of how to effectively use this. So in terms of history of cannabis goes way back. So it's a very old plant. Some of the earliest writings of it were about 6 or 7 thousand years ago, mostly in Asia and the Middle East. And it's tough to say exactly, what it was being used for, but likely some industrial purposes. So things like different ropes and fabrics. Probably also some medicinal usage and spiritual use as well. But we don't really have much documented history until closer to 5,000 years ago. And that's where we start to see in things like Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and Ayurveda. They're specifically talking about it for therapeutic purposes. So to use as a medicine and also spiritually. And then more recently, so 19th century becoming a part of like the modern pharmacopoeia. So we're identifying that it's used for pain relief, things like insomnia, muscle spasms, migraines, menstrual pain, seizures, GI issues. And then, of course, there was a period of prohibition, which we'll talk about. So a lot of that research kind of stopped, fell out of favor for a bit, but now we're seeing this resurgence, and there's still plenty of research and new information coming out about cannabis, but also which is used very widely recreationally, probably more so than ever now. So we're gonna get into all of that stuff. Now, hemp itself is a very interesting and versatile plant. So when I first learned about this stuff, it kind of blew my mind, all the different, we'll just call them industrial uses of hemp. So this is aside from the, medicinal part and aside from getting high in recreational use. This is just hemp itself, which is we're typically referring to the male hemp plant, so not the female. So one of the things is it has this very unique fiber. So they have these very long stalks and it can be used for as like various fibers and textiles. It's very strong, super strong. It's breathable, mildew resistant. It's super easy to grow. So there's a lot of benefits to the hemp plant itself, and it can be made into clothing. So you can find different shirts, pants, shorts, that kind of stuff made of hemp, shoes. Rope, that would be one of the more traditional uses because it's so strong. So rope, cordage, twine traditionally is also used. So you can make like canvas tents, but also sails. So for sailing is very important. The word canvas actually comes from the word cannabis, interestingly. And then you can also find, I've seen like bags, backpacks, all sorts of things like that. So you can use it as a fiber in that sense. It's also becoming very popular as a building material. So if you've ever heard of hempcrete, that's basically the hemp hurd, which comes from the stalk of the male hemp plant, and combined with the mineral lime. And then you can create this almost like a concrete type of form. And it's an excellent material. It's fireproof, it's mold resistant, it actually has very good insulative value as well. Like, it has all these incredible properties. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this being used in building. It's a little bit more niche right now, but you do see it in some places. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of applications from a building perspective, many that I'm not even aware of, but I know you can buy different like insulation bats, or you can build with hempcrete. It can also replace a lot of petroleum-based plastics. So I didn't know this, but apparently it's used in different car parts. So BMW, Tesla, Mercedes, they use this. This is all ChatGPT formulated. So I didn't know all this stuff. So I'm learning as well. But yeah, various consumer goods could be made from the plastics. It could also be used as paper. This is actually where a lot of the prohibition came from, which we'll discuss shortly. But you could use it as an alternative to paper for books, for papers. You often see rolling papers for cigarettes or cannabis that are made of hemp. Different packaging, cardboard, that could all be made from hemp instead of the traditional lumber paper. From a food perspective and nutrition, hemp seeds are very nutrient dense. Sometimes they're called hemp hearts as well. So they're pretty widespread now, especially in Canada, which is nice. I think a lot of them are grown in Manitoba. But yeah, it's a complete protein, has very beneficial fatty acids. You can also get hemp oil, which is great. There's hemp protein powders. I believe there's a company called Hemp. Yeah, that's I think they're Manitoba based as well, but you can buy protein powders, hemp milk, and then you're starting to see it in products like granolas and cereal bars and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's actually quite nutritionally dense. So, like I mentioned, complete protein, complete essential amino acid profile. It has a great omega 3 to 6 ratio. It's high in many minerals, so it's an awesome food source as well. You see it in cosmetics. So particularly the oil is great in a lot of different cosmetics. I don't know a ton about that, but yeah, I've only really consumed it. I can't say that I've used much of it topically, but it would be a good application for that as well. And then agriculturally too. So hemp is a bioremediator. Basically, what it can do, it can absorb toxicity from the soil. So you also want to be careful if you're consuming it. But if you were trying to just, increase soil health, then it can help do that. And I didn't know this either, but apparently hemp was used in after Chernobyl to pull out some of the radiation, the toxicity in the soil. So that's pretty cool. And from an agricultural perspective as well, it would be a great mulch. You could use it as a cover crop, animal bedding. You can make biochar out of it to improve, like as a soil amendment. So there's a lot of applications there. Fuel and energy, so you can produce biodiesel from the oil. There's probably many other things that I'm not aware of, but I know it can be used as an energy source. And then certain oils, so like lubricants, paints, solvents, all that kind of stuff. So you can see how it's incredibly versatile. And this is part of the issue and why it became prohibited at one point. Because generally, when these novel, what's called like technologies come out, that can replace pre-existing industries that already have a lot of money flowing through them. It's obviously a threat. So people, it's hard. It can be hard to adopt sometimes because that means that someone's going to be losing out on money. So what happened in the early 1900s, I believe. So basically, hemp was threatening the paper industry. So one of the major, I believe, is a newspaper producer, but I think he also had ties with the lumber industry. His name was William Hearst. He basically was threatened by the hemp industry because it would take over his newspaper business or something along those lines. I don't know the exact details, but he was posting. So what it basically did was he started this smear campaign. This was publishing this propaganda in the newspaper because that was the main way to get information to people. This was called like Reefer Madness is what it's called, and they're basically saying that Mexicans and jazz musicians, and they're tying race to it, but they're saying those people were smoking weed and going crazy and raping white women and saying all this like outrageous stuff, which is like laughable now because you can't even get high off of the hemp plant that's being used to make paper. So it's completely different than the female plant. But anyways, there was all this propaganda, and then cannabis became known as this dangerous thing, and there's still a lot of stigma around it. And then there's also the war on drugs, which is tied to other things as well, but that kind of got lumped in there. So there wasn't as much research going on. Wasn't Didn't have a great public face, I guess. But now we're starting to see that shift again. So cannabis is legalized in many places. We're understanding the medicinal impact, and we're starting to utilize the plant more readily. There's still a lot of not issues really, but I guess what's the word? Like red tape and restrictions around the use of cannabis. It's not always easy to get started in this industry, but the point is it's becoming more widespread now. There was a long history of it being prohibited, which was probably not founded, but now we're starting to see it become more popular, which is great in my opinion. So let's get into some of the benefits. So when we're talking about the health benefits, from a physical perspective, one of the things that is most well researched for, and yeah, I would say this seems to line up with my clinical experience as well, is pain relief. Whether it's acute or chronic pain, works very well for that. I can't think of any other herb that has the same type of pain relief properties. So it could be neuropathic pain, which is more like a nerve pain, menstrual pain, migraines, headaches. One of the unique things is that THC, which is one of the compounds in cannabis, it can bind to CB1 receptors. So that's a cannabinoid receptor in your brain. And that's in part why it has the psychoactive effect, but also the pain relieving effect, is its ability to bind to that brain receptor. You also have peripheral receptors in the rest of your body, but it can have a direct impact on your nervous system. It's also a great anti-inflammatory, so it helps to modulate the immune system, and therefore it can be great for certain autoimmune conditions. It's great for muscle relaxation as well, especially if you're getting a lot of cramps or spasticity or conditions like multiple sclerosis. It's very good for that. It's a great anti-nausea, antiemetic herb, meaning that if you feel well, nausea is kind of self-explanatory, but also like vomiting. If you're vomiting too much, it can help to suppress that. So yeah, it's great in many situations related to that. It's also an appetite stimulant, which a lot of people would think, okay, how is that a positive? But there are many cases where people do need to eat more, especially chemotherapy side effects or certain drugs like that. It's very common for people to not be eating much, and it can actually be very helpful because something like chemo can cause nausea, but also decreased appetite. So there you have an excellent medicine to support that. And there may be some anti-cancer properties as well. Yeah, this I don't know a ton about, but if you look into the work of Rick Simpson, he's used it successfully for, especially topically, for things like melanoma. This is a specific preparation that he uses. So I think there's probably going to be some benefits in that realm as well, especially if it is anti-inflammatory, binding to the central nervous system and having all these good impacts. It's very likely that it can be beneficial for cancer. I'm not saying it cures it, but it could be very beneficial. Okay, so then emotionally, so mentally, emotionally, spiritual health benefits. So a lot of people do get an anxiety reducing effect with cannabis, but it is very dose dependent. So if you're over consuming, especially too much THC, it can provoke anxiety. So that's one of the common reasons a lot of people don't like to use it, is because they feel very anxious, which is understandable. But with low dose, it can often reduce anxiety. Or CBD products. So basically, I can go over this now a little bit. There's two main constituents. There's plenty of other things in cannabis, but two of the main ones we focus on are THC and CBD. So THC is psychoactive, whereas CBD is not. They have some unique properties, which we'll go into more detail later. But it's just important to know that THC produces that psychoactive effect that basically gets you high. That's what gives you that feeling. CBD does not have any of that. So, in terms of anxiety, THC can provoke it if you're a little bit too high, but CBD does not. I've never really seen someone get aggravated or get more anxious using CBD. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It can be very beneficial for sleep support as well. This would, I mean, it could, I guess it's both THC and CBD, but THC in particular tends to kind of knock people out and give people more restful sleep. But it can have a negative impact on your sleep architecture. So that's definitely one of the downsides. But it can be super beneficial, and it certainly uh, creates less side effects than something like a sleep medication. So it's a good option if you're struggling with sleep. PTSD relief, it's also great for that. Mood regulation in general. I find good benefit in terms of creativity. So just helping you think in different ways, getting you out of your day-to-day thought patterns. And I would call it a pseudo psychedelic. So it's not a traditional psychedelic. It's not going to bind to the same receptors as something like psilocybin mushrooms or LSD or mescaline, that type of thing. So it acts in a different way than that, but it still has some of the psychedelic properties, and it probably creates some neurogenesis. So basically rewiring your brain. And a lot of people have very profound experiences with cannabis as well, in particular oral. So I think it can be great in that realm as well. And yeah, I mentioned a little bit about the differences between THC, CBD. So THC, you can think pain relief, relaxation, increases appetite. This is the psychoactive component. And then there's CBD that has some good anti-inflammatory properties, anti-anxiety, potentially some neuroprotective, and this is non-intoxicating. So if you're not looking to get high in any capacity, but you want to use as a herb, then CBD is the way to go. I generally lean towards using a full spectrum. So having both the THC and the CBD, that's the way it's found in nature. That's probably where we're going to get the best overall benefit. But everyone's different. We all have unique genetics and biology and neurochemistry. So you'll figure out what works best for you. But as a general rule, the more broad spectrum, the better. And there's many other cannabinoids as well. So there's CBG, CBN, THCV. There's like many different ones that we're starting to learn more about now. But generally, when you just isolate one thing, you're not going to get a great effect. This is just how nature works, right? It's better to have a whole apple than to extract just the sugar from it or just the fiber, whatever, right? Things work in they're synergistic. So in cannabis, we call it, or in the cannabis world, they call it the entourage effect, meaning that all of the different components have a synergistic effect. So you have all these different cannabinoids, you have terpenes. It's a very complex plant. So in the herbal medicine world, it's far more complex than most other plant medicines, and I think it's the combination of all of these different compounds which give it the main benefits that we're looking for. Okay, so those are some of the benefits. In terms of some of the risks and downsides, so short term, obviously there's psychoactive effects. So if you don't want to get high, stay away from THC, but this can provoke anxiety and paranoia if you overdo it. It can also reduce coordination. So not quite to the level of like alcohol intoxication, but you want to be careful driving or operating heavy machinery or anything like that, especially with THC. There are some short-term memory effects. It's very common just to like, have poor short-term recall when you're actively high. And then over consuming, particularly edibles, that is where, yeah, people tend to get more psychological effects like the anxiety or paranoia. So you want to be very careful with edibles and just dosing in general, not to overdo it. Now, long term, it's not considered to be addictive, like something like cocaine or even caffeine or heroin, those types of things. So it's not physiologically very addictive, but psychologically, for some people, it can be. And like any habit, there's various reasons why people get addicted to things, but it can be very habit forming, especially because it's accessible. There isn't really a negative like come down as there are with other recreational drugs or other substances. So it's not like you have the experience and then you feel absolutely terrible after. It's pretty. You end up just kind of tired, I guess, after and then fall asleep. So it's easy. You could easily do this every night without like major long-term consequences that you're feeling, right? So yeah, just to say this can be very habit forming due to the accessibility for a lot of people. And some people they just have more of an addictive personality. So you need to be careful, know where you're at with that. And I do not recommend using this daily, but it could be used on occasion, specifically if it feels aligned with you. There could be some cognitive effects with heavy long-term use. Smoking is generally not advised. So smoking any substance really is not great for your lungs. So it's much better to vaporize or use edibles for these purposes. Now, sleep, it can certainly help you fall asleep and stay asleep too, but it does disrupt your sleep architecture. That's mostly the THC as well. So you just want to be careful doing this long term. That's why I don't recommend using this daily. And it can also decrease sperm quality and testosterone when it's overused as well. Now, generally, it's quite benign, so it's very safe. There are zero reported deaths from cannabis ever, and there is no LD50, which is basically like the lethal dose that's identified by scientists. So they haven't been able to identify that, so it's not really, you can't really say that cannabis is toxic in any way in that sense. It's not lethal. There may be some interactions with different medications, in particular psychoactive medications, so just be cautious with that. But in terms of safety, no one's ever died, so that's great. Now, in terms of the best methods to use, so we discussed vaporization, which is excellent. I don't really recommend I'll call them the new age vaporizers, which are the little pens that have the oils in them. I'm sure there are some clean ones, but a lot of them have different additives and fillers in there, which aren't going to be great to inhale. It's very convenient, but it's not likely not going to be the best. And those ones tend to be very high in THC anyways. They're not very balanced. So using what I'll call an old school vaporizer, a dry herb vaporizer. It's basically a mini oven. So you open up the little chamber, you put the dried herb in there, and then you can set the temperature. So you can go as high or low as you want, and just depending on the flavor profile and what you like of the effects. But it's not actually combusting. It's just heating things up. So you're not inhaling all that smoke, and that would be a much better option for inhalation. Now, inhaling is going to give you the quickest effects. So almost immediately you will feel the effects. And it doesn't last as long. Whereas oral use, oral ingestion, that's going to take a little bit longer. So it may take, 30, 40, an hour, hour and a half, depends on the person and if you just had a meal or not, there's various factors. But it takes longer to hit you and it lasts much longer as well. So it depends on what you're going for. And the experience is a little bit different as well. So actually what happens with oral cannabis is that it gets converted in your liver to a different compound. So it's actually yeah, I mean, it's almost like you're doing not a completely different drug, but a different, it's a different substance that you're ingesting at that point because it gets converted into something else. And that's why it lasts longer and has a bit of a different profile to it. And like I said, you need to be careful with dosage of this. Smoking is a little bit more self-limiting. You're probably going to stop after a certain point, but for oral ingestion, it's very easy to overdo edibles and then it could not be the greatest situation. So you want to be careful with that. Now, there's kind of an in between actually, which is tinctures. So that's an alcohol extract. So THC is fat soluble, meaning that you need a fat to extract it. So you couldn't just put it in water. You can't just make like a weed tea. That's not how it works. You would need some sort of oil. So the simplest way, if you're wanting to make your own oil, you basically just get some dried cannabis, or I guess you could use fresh. I've never tried that, but you can add some oil. So coconut oil, olive oil, whatever oil of choice, butter. Put that in like a slow cooker, very low heat for some period of time, and then the oil will extract the THC and some of the other compounds, and then you strain that out, and then you could use that oil however you want. You could consume it, or you could add it to some sort of, the classic thing would be brownies or some sort of edible like that. You could use it topically, right? The other way to do it is to use an alcohol extract. So this would be a tincture. Alcohol can extract both the water and fat soluble compounds. It's super easy. So same thing, you can get your dried herb, add a bunch of alcohol to a jar, and then you let it sit for a few weeks, shake it here and there, and then the alcohol will extract those compounds. And the nice thing about this is that it does, well, first of all, it's very easy to dose, especially if you have a little tincture bottle that tells you how much is on there. So it's great for that sense. But also, it doesn't last quite, it hits you a little bit quicker than an oil-based edible, and it won't last quite as long either. So it's kind of an in-between option. Now, topical is another great option. So you can make different various oils. You could use it for pain and various skin issues. So it's going to have a good anti-inflammatory effect. So a lot of people like to use it for pain purposes, and there's no psychoactive effect when you're using it topically. So then last thing is that there are different strains. So there's indica, there's sativa, there's hybrid. So everyone, like I said, is going to be different. Everyone's going to gravitate towards different things or have, different benefits with certain types. So indica, I always remember this as indica is indicouch. So this is your classic kind of like stoner strain, I guess, where you're very relaxed. It will help with sleep. You're just kind of like lying on the couch, muscles very relaxed. It's more of like a body high. So generally, I'd recommend this more for nighttime use, whereas sativa is kind of the opposite. So that is more of a cerebral, you get more kind of thoughts and creativity, a little bit more energizing, might be better for socializing as well. So that'd be something you might want to think about more for the daytime use. And then there's hybrids, which are a combination of both. So that's also a safe bet if you're not really sure. Just you can go in between. And there's so many different strains now. So it really depends on what you like. And for some people, they will use one strain, they'll feel very anxious, they won't like it. They use another one, and it's great. They feel relaxed, and it's perfect for them. So it really just depends, and that's where some experimentation comes in handy. What I would recommend for most people is, well, for everyone, is to start with a low dose. So if you've never used it before or you're not sure, you definitely want to err on the side of a lower dose of THC in particular. And then also, the way it's found in nature is going to be a balanced spectrum of THC and CBD. So you can often find things that are like a 1-to-1 ratio of THC CBD that's pretty well balanced, and you can play around with those ratios. But most of the things nowadays, because a lot of people are just looking to just get high, they're not looking for the medicinal benefits, things are very heavily skewed towards higher in THC. So for medicinal purposes, try to find something that's a little bit more balanced. 1-to-1 ratio is great, and you could start with a low amount. So they often come, some of the lower ones would be like 2 milligrams of THC per, like gummy or whatever. You could do that. You could do half of that. That's a pretty like safe, small dose. It's not medical advice, but if, you are starting, you just want to make sure you're starting low, and gradually increase and just experiment if it calls to you, right? This isn't going to be something that everyone wants to use, but there is some great research on the medicinal benefits. There's a lot of misinformation about the harms. There obviously are some, like every other substance, but I think a lot of the stigma is still kind of, we're undoing some of that. So at the end of the day, cannabis is just a plant. We can't be blaming plants saying that, mushrooms or psychedelic cacti or cannabis are harmful. Even tobacco itself is not, it's not trying to harm us. It's just a plant. Depends how you use it. If you use it responsibly, it's grown properly, you're using the right dosages, it can be very beneficial. And that's why you see very long usage, and a rich history of using these plants, and they can be tremendously therapeutic when used properly. So, yeah, again, it's not medical advice, but hope you guys learned something about this. If you have any questions, you can shoot us a message on Instagram or email at Nature Academy. And I'm also posting a little bit more on Substack, which is kind of like an email platform, also a blog type thing. So you can find Nature Academy on there and subscribe and stay up to date with all the stuff that we're doing. But thanks again for listening, and I hope you guys have an awesome day and an awesome winter as well. Talk to you soon. Bye.